There is a fascinating interview out now with Jordan Henderson on The Athletic from Adam Crafton and David Ornstein. And a lot of people are reacting to one very specific part of it. But obviously, as a Liverpool fan, I'm fascinated to look at the overall construction of the interview, but also look at what it meant for Liverpool, what it meant for Jurgen Klopp, what it means for the future of the Premier League in general, what it means for overall the game and where we're going with things. So if you want to stick around with that, I'm kind of fascinated to hear people's views on it. Let me know in the comments below what your view is on the whole Jordan Henderson thing right now. I'm not interested in your hot takes. I'm interested in genuinely hearing what people have to say. And that is why also, if you haven't already subscribed, hit it down there or wait till the end of the video when you go, you know what, this guy, I think I could probably put up with him. Probably. Anyway, Adam Crafton and David Ornstein, The Athletic. Probably one of the best combinations in terms of interviews we've ever had, but also probably a great interview combination for this, right? David Ornstein, well connected in the game. Adam Crafton, incredibly well connected in the game, but also someone who's good at critiquing the powers that be out there. And that is what's super important, I think, here. And on top of that, he's also a member of the LGBT community. So we will get onto that in a little while. But I want to start with some of Jordan Henderson's Liverpool quotes and what it tells us about that, right? Jordan Henderson is and was a Liverpool legend, right? He lifted the Champions League, he lifted the Premier League. I think he lifted pretty much every trophy that you could lift that he competed in that time, which is pretty special in the first place. He completed that set, if you like, at the very, very top level. And he was an incredibly important part of Jurgen Klopp's squad. But as he kind of alluded to in this interview, it got to a point where, especially last summer, I knew that time would come at some point. I didn't think it would be now, but I had to accept that, right? I had to accept that. And I think what it's telling, what I get from this is that whilst people are busy criticizing Jurgen Klopp, saying, you know, he's not ruthless enough, he doesn't cut people from the squad fast enough, there are too many people in the team that he cares too much about, there are too many people in the side who are, you know, riding on the Jurgen Klopp bus for no reason. Jordan Henderson speaks very candidly here. He says he always had a lot of love for Jurgen Klopp. He says he always had a lot of love for the club, the owners, and the years that he spent there. He obviously spent the majority of his career in Liverpool. A lot of that quite maligned, by the way. A lot of that with people criticising him, not getting behind him, doubting him, wanting him out of the club. Even when he was winning things, there was, could we upgrade this position? Well, in the previous, and here's the thing is, in the previous iteration of Liverpool, in the previous version of the midfield, Jordan Henderson did vital things. Not only did he motivate the players, not only did he let people know where to be, not only was he a great communicator and a motivator out on the field, he was also a great technical footballer who understood and exacted his role in a very precise way, and in a way which you always knew was going to get 100% effort. But if you look at the midfield now, and I think this is what's interesting, is when Jordan Henderson and Fabinho were leaving, we saw, oh, you know, right, okay, yeah, well, how are we going to replace them? How are we going to get a new 6? How are we going to get a new 8? Well, Szoboszlai and McAllister were already coming in. Those guys were pretty promising players in the first place. I think people feared there would be a bit of a defensive chasm, and that Liverpool maybe wouldn't be able to cope without both of those players leaving, one of which was a huge vocal leader, one of which was a huge stalwart and a rock in the team, at least for a majority of his career at Liverpool. But Jordan Henderson says a few things set alarm bells ringing. I've got a good relationship with Jurgen. He was very honest with me. I won't go into detail about the conversation, but because it's private, but it put me in a position where I knew I wasn't going to be playing as much. So, first of all, you know, I think there's a lot of people out there, again, who like to say Jurgen just puts players in the team out of charity. I don't think that's the way that Liverpool merit works, right? I knew there were going to be new players coming in my position. Now, what's interesting about it is Liverpool changed the 8 position almost entirely in this team now. So what Henderson would have been doing, first of all, I think probably would have gotten it a little bit in the way of what Trent Alexander-Arnold wants to do, probably would have crossed over too much heat map-wise with Szoboszlai, but also he wouldn't have been able to do what Szoboszlai is currently doing, though you could see there were efforts towards the end of last season where he was trying to do that link-up play. It's just, you know, Szoboszlai's younger, Szoboszlai has a different skill set, all these kind of things. And finally, I don't know if there's a left side for Jordan Henderson in this team where would it be McAllister? No, McAllister's the starter over Jordan Henderson there. Would it be Thiago? Well, Thiago's almost permanently on the injury table at the moment, but you get my point. Like, he's not those kind of players. He's also not Curtis Jones. Curtis Jones, would you rather invest in the future or would you rather just invest in Jordan Henderson? Again, Jurgen Klopp made a decision. We go even further down. And we kind of get to a point now where it's becoming very clear in the interview that Jordan Henderson was not asked to stay. And that when the offer was in, it was pretty much, well, this is a great offer for us. We're not going to get much more money for you if you're going to leave the club anyway. And as much as we now have to fill a gap, and I will do a whole Liverpool rebuild video later in the week, it's been great, but thanks. And that, to an extent, I think is kind of fair enough. Like, now, he says here, and I have to then think about what's next for me in my career. And this kind of leads us on to the rest of the interview, right? His career was so much Liverpool. His career was so much about being a very specific player for Liverpool. I think he sacrificed a lot in terms of, maybe not capability, but I just think in terms of perception, the way that people saw him, treated him. You could see he was important to Liverpool, he was important to England, he was important to so many of these sides because he would give them a sense of, right, we're trying to achieve X. And sometimes you can get a bit lost in games. You need someone who's just going to say, we're just going to do this, and this is how we're going to ride this game out or win this game or move in this direction, do that. At no point did I feel wanted, that's the key, wanted by the club or anyone to stay. So I guess when he's saying anyone, he's kind of alluding to fans. I mean, maybe he's talking about managers. Maybe he's talking about specific players there. I don't think he's talking about players, but I think maybe he's speaking about very specific people. Jordan Henderson's on his way out. Next up, actually, this time, does it matter what I do? What he's referring to here is one thing we have to acknowledge before he left is Jordan Henderson looked great this summer. And I mean, like, one of the all-time best Jordan Henderson looks that we've seen. He looked trim. He actually looked stacked and cut all at the same time. He looked slim. He looked like he was ready to run. He was clearly putting a lot of athletic work in. He was clearly on top of that, putting a lot of muscle work in. So not only was he going to be strong, he was also going to be able to do that for a very long time. It's interesting just to think in terms of, does it matter what I do? If you feel that way at a club, to an extent, I think that means that the regime is moving on and it's not really a personal thing. I think a lot of people at the time wanted to make it a personal thing, this kind of, he's choosing it because of money, he's done it because he's forcing his way out, all these kind of things. I don't at any point think I said that Jordan Henderson was forcing his way out, and in fact, I think broadly I tried to understand why he was making the decision, which kind of leads me on to the rest of this. So it's at this point when he left Liverpool that I want to say this. I think people talk about the players not being able to turn down certain offers, right? And I get that. Money-wise, this was generational wealth. On the other side of that, I think it also conflicts the clubs. Liverpool knew they were never going to get this amount of money for Jordan Henderson or Fabinho again. They knew they were never going to get this kind of offer at this point in someone's career. He's 33 now. Fabinho was coming into the twilight of his career. They wanted to replace him anyway. Same with Henderson. It's going to conflict people in the years to come unless we jointly and collectively I guess check Saudi Arabia and make sure that everything is acting for the best for football. Now, you can't tell someone don't spend more money. You can't tell someone don't offer them X, Y, Z. Otherwise, you're going to have to check your own practices. And I think that's part of the problem. UEFA, the Premier League, all these people maybe feel slightly conflicted because it has been the Wild West for a while. And in the Wild West, when someone then comes in with a whole load of gold bars, it changes stuff. I think what we're going to see in years to come is Saudi Arabia testing a lot of people's tolerance and threshold for A, cash, B, morals, and C, what they've said before. I already know that I've tried to understand more of how I felt about LGBTQ rights, all these kind of things. Not that I question them, I feel very strong on them. That's one thing. But the money side is a whole other thing. How many people want to work with Saudi Arabia? How many people want to represent something that previously they felt at odds with or against? Maybe as they understand more, they will want to work with them because maybe they see them as people, maybe they understand them and humanize them, justify their own decisions. That's a whole other thing. Money that Saudi Arabia is willing to inject into the game will change and is already changing football. It is changing where the power is. It is changing what money people have to spend because of the amount of money they can get from Saudi Arabia. If Liverpool get 200 million for Mo Salah, that changes how much money they can spend in the transfer market for the next 2-3 windows. So it automatically shifts them into another position. Also, you know, if you can turn a player's head right before a game, if you can go, hey, what about this though? Right before a big game? Like happened with Mo Salah in Newcastle? What then? Is that power that we should also be questioning? All these things are powers that we should be questioning here. So that is another aspect. And then on top of that, I think they will turn players' heads like this, and no one's going to tell a different story because Liverpool don't want to get embroiled in all of this. Jurgen Klopp doesn't want to get embroiled in all of this. They're happy to have Jordan Henderson wherever he is now, and he can tell his own story however he wants. I guess what I'm saying is the players will have their heads turned by money. And saying it was about football is one thing, but broadly, we know that money makes a difference. And we know that that will shift the power elsewhere. It will shift. It won't, I don't think it's not going to shift the whole Premier League, but it's going to shift elements of the Premier League towards where that money is. Some people might even try and develop Saudi players. Some people might even try and develop a relationship with Saudi Arabia outside of Newcastle. It's just interesting to look at. And I think we understand where this is going, right? James Alcott's done a lot about it. We've done a lot on our podcast about it. It's interesting to try to understand it and see how people's views are changing. Even over the weeks that this gets covered, the more normalized that having Saudi Arabia as a center part of the game, financially, footballing-wise, all these kind of things, becomes more interesting. I think there was always going to be criticism regardless of what I did, whether I stayed, whether I went. So basically, I had to make a decision what was best for me and my family. Now, this is the point where the interview gets a little difficult, shall we say, because, and I think a lot of people are criticizing Jordan Henderson with good reason on Twitter. I think maybe they could be a little bit more charitable. I think they could probably look into what he's trying to say in this interview and maybe what he's trying to maybe politically work his way around. Obviously, he knows he has to go back to Saudi Arabia after this. So there's, you can't cut ties. You can't just burn bridges with your employer. Basically, I had to make a decision what was best for me and my family. First of all, generationally, I think what would have been best is a huge amount of cash, right? Is setting yourself up for generations to come, for lifetimes to come. That is partly what Saudi offer with their offers, right? Small amounts of money to the club, or relatively small, high amounts of money to the player. Lots of money on a weekly basis, not Ronaldo level, but generational wealth types sort of thing. And I think this is the point where people kind of lose it with Jordan Henderson. And maybe I'm more charitable than other people. I made the documentary about him. I've always obviously loved him as a Liverpool fan. I've tried to understand him as a man and as a player because A, making a documentary, but B, you want to try and relate to your captain. You want to try and have some form of like bond and relationship with the people that you see as heroes out on the field. And that's what I find kind of weird, right? Like him and I are roughly the same age. I'm older than him actually, but him and I are roughly the same age. I understand the need to provide for your family. I understand the need to solidify what it is that you have. And he loses me beyond the what's best for my family part, because I will go on to explain this in a minute. I do agree with him in the sense that you can't just go to another country and say, you're doing it wrong. There is a colonial nature to that. I think you can't go to another country and just walk in and go, I don't agree with any of this. I think culturally you have to show a level of sensitivity and understanding. Otherwise, broadly, I don't think you're ever going to change anything in another country in the first place. No one's going to want to listen to someone who just walks into a country and says, you're all idiots for doing it this way. We know better where we are and we've got it right. Mainly because, there's obviously different customs, and I think there's a lot of unsaid things about Saudi Arabia, although there's also a lot of said things that make me think that a lot of things are unsaid about Saudi Arabia. And I think broadly, I don't quite understand why Jordan Henderson is the only person getting the ire here. If Jordan Henderson is to get it, I think the British government should get it. I think Newcastle United on a weekly basis should get it. I think Eddie Howe should get it even more and be held up as a hypocrite if we're calling Jordan Henderson a hypocrite. If that is what Jordan Henderson is to find out. But I think ultimately in history, a lot of this will be seen as, I think people do feel let down rightly, right? Because I think part of the reason they feel that let down is because of the oblique nature of what Jordan Henderson is saying. It seems almost willfully to ignore what some people feel, right? Because of them being LGBT or any of these things. Those people still have feelings. No matter how you feel about them, whether you feel that homosexuality and people from the LGBT community have, whatever you conceive of them, they are still humans, And I err on the side of I'm pro-LGBT. which is a bizarre thing to have to say, right? But I also feel that humans need to have a basic standard of life. And within that is to be respected, regardless of background, religion, all these kind of things, right? And I think Jordan Henderson shouldn't be the only person questioned for that. And in fact, part of it is football is reflective of what is going on right now in the world. And for me, I think it's reflective of the fact we can't have an honest conversation, an open conversation, a critical conversation about different societies because we're very conscious about what's happened before, because we're very conscious about the colonial history, because we're very conscious about the fact that at some point, I think a lot of people realize Saudi Arabia is going to need to do business with the West, and the West is going to need to do business, even more business with Saudi Arabia. I just think a lot of this stuff seems like very performative. It's not empty, but saying I want to grow the sport all over the world, and that got me going, I get that. I understand that. I also think, and we'll get onto this in a second, I also think Jordan Henderson deserves an element of grace, partly because of what he has done in the past. And I think the anger around it is also justified. But let's just try to understand what someone's saying here, right? I think people know my views and values before I left and still do now. I think people are a lot more unclear on them now. I definitely feel a lot less unclear on them. And I think having someone with those views and values in Saudi Arabia is only a positive thing. Now, I get this, right? And I think this is important. I think the criticism of him and basically saying, if you align yourself with X, then you believe X is not helpful to the discourse around it, right? Because also I don't think that necessarily it's healthy to, I think to ostracize someone and to put them out into the wilderness, so to speak, not that Saudi Arabian League is the wilderness, this man's going to do very well for the rest of his life in terms of cash, but to put them out into the wilderness in terms of public discourse, all these kind of things, isn't healthy. To damage a football career, to damage a legacy, that's Jordan Henderson's decision. He knew what the trade-off was, right? But I think his point stands here. And I think having someone there with those views and values in Saudi Arabia is only a positive thing. This is twofold. First of all, you are not going to change views of people overnight. No one expects people to change their views overnight. And I don't think that saying to someone, you are wrong and don't worry, in time that will change, I think that's a little bit patronizing. I think on top of that, Saudi Arabia will feel the same about the West. Saudi Arabia will feel, well, maybe if we have Jordan Henderson over here, people will look into what we do and say. And that's also a valid position to take, right? But the level of treatment and disrespect and human rights issues is huge, right? I think he's right, though. There is something further on where I can't remember where I've left it here. Okay. You know, years ago, for instance, women or kids probably couldn't play football, but now I'm over there and there's loads of women and girls playing football. So slowly things can change. I think it's broadly a good point. I think broadly interaction, trading of beliefs, trading of values, respect of those values is important. It's just that weirdly, that can't be a one-way thing. That has to go both ways. And I think the funny thing is some people still have this idea of that those values only go one way and then the values don't come back. I think since Jordan Henderson has gone to Saudi Arabia, I think since the Qatar World Cup, since all these things, there have been a lot of people who have been emboldened. Not necessarily. Now, I think there's a difference between being respectful of people's views and respectful of their lifestyle and saying, I have a religious or cultural belief, and being openly homophobic. Those two things are different, right? And there are conversations to be had around both. If you're openly homophobic and disrespectful to someone, I don't think you're taking part in the discourse. I think you have to get to a certain level where you're speaking with respect. And that is not, I think a lot of people aren't doing that. And the comments maybe reflect that sometimes. You can see I feel conflicted about this because obviously I had a relationship with him. I don't have a relationship with Jordan Henderson now. I don't have any kind of investment in the man. I kind of wish I could have done something because it would have been interesting to speak to him, but he's gone to a big outlet. There's never been any mention, there's never been any mention of you can say this. Yeah, that's because it goes as read, all right? I think he's, again, being willfully I don't think he's being willfully ignorant. I think it's misleading to say you can say this, you can't say that. It's basically you have your values and your beliefs, which we will respect, but you respect our values and our beliefs. That's the only other aspect I think I want to explore here. Jordan Henderson basically is going to a country where you have your beliefs, we have ours. I think when you get there and there is a practical trade of beliefs, this might age badly. I'd really love to know in 5 years' time what I think about this. When you trade those beliefs, you see that there's actually a lot more commonality between people. There's actually a lot more understanding. There's actually a lot more about the discourse in practicality than there is in a newspaper article or something else. So I think the criticism of Jordan Henderson is valid, but I also think it's hypocritical. Criticise Eddie Howe in the same way, criticise Newcastle United players, criticise Newcastle United themselves, criticise Adidas, who are going to be picking stuff up with them, criticise Castore, all these people. Castor, I don't know how you say it. Ornstein, is there anything else you want to say to people? I think this is a telling quote to finish the article. No, just thanks for taking the time. I don't want a pat on the back or anything, but I could have easily not done anything. Okay, I could easily have not made a YouTube channel. I could have gone with another journalist, Adam is part of the LGBT community, that's in brackets, who I may have a relationship with and been protected more. Sure, I think either way, I mean, that's a really quite narrow view to take. You probably just would have been castigated even more in the media. But I feel as though this felt right. It probably did. They're both two really understanding guys, Ornstein and Adam Crafton, because I want to learn as well. I think now here's where I felt conflicted by Jordan Henderson. I made a documentary with him. We made that about values, and we made that about what was important to him. I think those things were important to him then. I think they are probably still very important to him. But I think he feels conflicted because of where he now goes to work, B, because he wanted to take some of that money, even though he refutes that and says the conversation with Jordan Henderson with Stephen Gerrard was always about money. I guess that's where you have an agent. You know, not everyone's just going to Jordan Henderson and going, you signed the contract, you're going to check the contract. He has agents, he has lots of people around him, and you can afford even more of those when you have that massive contract coming in. Because it's hard for me to hear some of the stuff that I've heard, and now I want to learn why that's the case and how I can help going forward. People can make their own mind up. Same people can make their own mind up, I would feel is a bit of a cop-out. I think Jordan Henderson, personally, is better than that, and I think given time, I think we might see that. I think coming back to England and in the England camp is a really good thing for him because I think it will show a lot of the conflict, and I think it's a good time to have this conversation. I've heard and I want to learn why that's the case. I think he should have already learned why that's the case. If he's advocating for these groups in the first place, if he's wearing the rainbow armband, if he's wearing the rainbow laces, he probably should already know what he's representing, and I think he already does. I think he's right though. Discourse is important. Chatting, talking, understanding is important. And if you don't know enough, and maybe you put your name to something that you didn't fully understand how important it was, but what the impact was, maybe you should go back and research that and admit that not you were wrong, but that you need to know more. There's something about Qatar in here that I haven't covered, but I kind of covered it. Basically, he kind of just talks about meeting the workers. And at that point, you lose me, because I get it. Like, there's people who die in every country. I think there was conflicts over the workers in Qatar, and it still troubles me to this day that we don't speak enough about that stuff. So I'd love to know what your views are in the comments below. I've tried to unpick some of this. I think David Ornstein and Adam Crafton did a great job of trying to unpack it. And remember, I think they did put questions on him. I think they put, being an interviewer myself, being someone who's taken up part in over 100 podcasts interviewing people and tried to construct stories with people, tried to understand their life, tried to understand what their motivations are. I get why it's difficult. You can't just sit down and go, you hate gay people, what are you doing? I think that's reductive. And I respect Ornstein and Crafton for both sitting down and doing this analysis of him. To an extent, what I understand as an interviewer is, if you are doing an interview, you don't need someone to explicitly say, here's what I understand, here's how I see the world. Not everyone speaks in that way, and sometimes people shy away from the responsibility that maybe they feel and maybe they understand, but can't admit in that moment because of conflicts and all these kind of things. So what they've done is they've fed him the quotes and the differing views, and I think they found a way to show how conflicted Jordan Henderson feels, which is maybe reflective of the good journalism being done here, but at the same time, how Saudi Arabia is conflicting people. And I think this will only go to show that the power of Saudi Arabia in football, until they are regulated, is only going to grow. Saudi Arabia is only, as a footballing power, going to continue to grow like this. So I'd be interested to know what you guys think. Let me know in the comments below, and I will chat to you again in a little while.